Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable, carbon neutral society, and I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. Let's talk cities. 4.4 billion people, or about 56% of the humans on our planet, live in cities. And urban populations are projected to increase to 80% of the population by 2050. Our guest today is Nadina Galle, a pioneering ecological engineer and the author of the new book, The Nature of Our Cities. Nadina's research focuses on integrating nature and technology to create sustainable urban environments. She pioneered the concept of the Internet of Nature, which explores how emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, automation, and sensors, like the e-plant sensors that we've talked about on the show, can be used to support and enhance natural ecosystems within cities. In her book, Nadina explores the dynamic relationship between urban spaces and the natural world, offering insights about how we can rethink city living in the face of climate change and urban sprawl. For example, she looks at the evolution of the Groen Loper project in Maastricht in the Netherlands, where soil sensors were used to monitor and maintain tree health, and the redirection of an entire freeway recreated the city center. Trees grown with the help of these sensors were significantly larger, up to 3 times larger than those grown without sensors. Therefore, nature was more robust. It's intriguing to see technology not only prevent tree loss, but also promote thriving urban greenery. The Nature of Our Cities is an intriguing investigation into how technology can be a powerful ally in restoring and enhancing urban ecosystems. You can find Nadina Galle's latest book, The Nature of Our Cities, on Amazon or at Powell's Books. And we'll get to the conversation right after a brief commercial break. Welcome to the show, Nadina. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Mitch. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, and thanks so much for the book. I've been a fan. I guess that's not the right way to describe the intellectual relationship I have with Jane Jacobs and Lewis Mumford, previous theorists of the city. But I was really intrigued by what you wrote in The Nature of Our Cities, and I wanted to ask how you were inspired to do it, particularly by your experience of growing up in Waterloo, Ontario, which is one of the fastest growing urban areas in the North America.
Well, to even be mentioned in the same sentence as those two theorists and urbanists is already a huge compliment. So thank you. A lot of my thinking indeed stemmed from growing up in Waterloo, which I think is a very typical, North American suburb that maybe a lot of people can relate to a childhood in a suburb like that. The only difference is that, as you mentioned, this one was extremely fast growing, and I witnessed this all around me. The house that I grew up in and the house in which my parents still live used to be very much on the outskirts of Waterloo. And in the 2 decades almost that I lived there, I saw that almost become the center of Waterloo, purely just because of the sprawl that I was seeing on the other side.
Mhm.
And this is something that I saw every day walking to my high school, which was built actually to house the growing need of the population growth, and walking through these new subdivisions that seem to just copy paste one another. It was this, very different kind of urban development than even the suburb where my parents had their house, which was built in the late 70s, early 80s. Even then, perhaps that was because of the economic times, right? There was more space and more resources to go around. There was a lot more greenery that was preserved, whether that was little swaths of forest between the streets or a network of walking and biking trails behind the homes. And all those things seem to be gone in these new subdivisions I was seeing right in the early millennium. These subdivisions that seem to first decimate an entire ecosystem and then put these cookie cutter beige houses that were very car centric. And then only after the fact, plant a seedling. And I just thought it was so odd because there seems to be this intrinsic want and desire for greenery, yet we're first going to remove everything that we have and then put it back in. And on top of that, these new subdivisions would have names like Forest Heights or Clear Hills or Sunset Forest View. And it's like, huh? We're giving all these subdivisions these very nature-inspired names, but they look very, very different to what you might envision when you hear of a neighborhood called Forest Heights or Clear Hills. And I had a lot of questions about this kind of style of urban development, especially because I compared it a lot to the summertime when we would go back to the Netherlands and visit family, friends, and my cousins. I was born in the Netherlands and moved to Canada when I was 6 years old. And comparing these two very different types of urban development, I had a lot of questions that I brought to my parents. And my parents very much encouraged big questions and big discussions in our household between my sister and I. And after I voiced these concerns, my dad came back, a couple days later with a huge stack of books of some, you mentioned Jane Jacobs and other urbanists like James Howard Kunstler and landscape architects, and encouraged me to read all of them. And then we had a series of discussions as we made our family walks and walking the family dog through these new neighborhoods, and encouraged a lot of those questions. And I would argue that's probably where all of this started.
Well, congratulations to your dad, because that's exactly the right thing to have done. It's so good to see that. As you think about technology, well, in fact, environmentalists generally don't think of technology as a positive because of the extractive impacts associated with making it. How do you articulate the opportunity to liberate nature within a city using technology in a way that doesn't simply sound like, well, let's just make more stuff?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the fact that we, those of us living in cities, and by cities, I don't just mean, dense urban cores like Manhattan, but it could really mean anything from towns and villages to suburbs to central business districts. If I had had my way, I would have called the book not The Nature of Our Cities, but The Nature of Where We Live, because I truly believe each and every one of us has this unique and special connection with nature that we must preserve and keep to not only safeguard our well-being, but also our health and our safety in this, rising world of natural disasters that we live in. And the fact of the matter is, the majority of us live in these urbanized settings and will continue to do so. So we live in these very modern places, and you could argue that everything has undergone some kind of technological revolution, whether that be how we get around our cities, our mobility, our lighting, our waste management, our democratic processes in many ways. Yet the very foundation on which our cities are built, the nature, the ecosystem, has long been left behind from that digital revolution. And that is exactly what I wanted to attack. This idea that we don't need to go back to nature. In fact, we need to move forwards to nature. And we live in modern cities. Deeply integrating nature into our urban design is going to require a modern approach. And I believe this subset of emerging technologies that I call the Internet of Nature has a really key role to play in that.
As you say, we use a form of bait and switch when you name places like Shady Grove or something like that. It sounds wonderful and natural, but then you get there and you find more urbanism. What's the benefit of living in close proximity to nature? And is living in near a park in a city the same as, for instance, living in a forest? How would you
Mm.
describe the difference, and where can we take our cities to improve our physical and mental well-being?
Yeah, it's such an odd thing that we humans do, right? Like, and the scientist in me wants to give you this whole batch of statistics and very, reductionistic, list of pros that nature gives us, right? Whether that be increased vitamin D and increased physical exercise. And there's even studies to show that has an impact on pregnant mothers and their unborn babies, that it leads to higher birth weights and less conflict in schoolyards. And there's all these really important, mental health and physical well-being and longevity aspects of living close to nature. It also just gives a buffer. Nature provides this resilient buffer against a lot of the natural disasters that continue to threaten our city's health. Things like extreme heat events, extreme flooding and precipitation, wildfires, biodiversity loss. Having more nature in our cities provides a buffer against these natural disasters, which also threaten our lives and that of our families and that of our property. So there's all these reasons why nature is incredibly important. But then the question, as you touch on, Mitch, is like, okay, but what is nature
Mhm.
exactly? I actually wrote part of a chapter on this as well, as trying to define exactly what nature was. And I kept kind of going around and around and around. And then I realized that it's not really up to me to decide what nature is and to define that for other people. everyone is going to have their own definition of what nature means to them. And for some people, that could be as simple as having a balcony and putting potted plants on that balcony and standing on that balcony and seeing bees, float, swarm around the flowers that they have, or feeling the breeze on their face. That in itself already could be their version of nature. For other people, it's a 21-day solo hike through Yosemite Park, right? Like it's going to be a completely different definition to everybody. But research does show us that even having 15 minutes a day, that's it, 15 minutes a day of uninterrupted, fully engaged time in a, heavily tree-lined street, or even better, an urban park, that already is going to give us so many of these benefits that our human body really, really craves. And, you could say two things about that. You could say, one, you could say, wow, how devastating is it? Is that we only require 15 minutes a day in an urban park to have these benefits? How far removed must humanity be from the natural world for already that little bit to give us a little bit of respite? Or you could say, wow, what a wonderful opportunity, because that means that even in our most urbanized settings, areas where we think nature can have absolutely no role here, even in those areas, we can bring a touch of nature into our cities for the benefit of everybody.
Well, a lot of environmentalists object to the idea of adding more technology, even though if you look at a city, it's just a whole concatenation of different technologies in terms of how we structure buildings and lay out streets and so forth. We're simply doing more of what we've been doing, but
Yeah.
we are trying to do it differently. What are the technologies that you think are going to be key to unlocking this new opportunity for a relationship with nature?
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. And I consider myself a diehard environmentalist, if you can call
Mhm.
it that, at the end of the day. And I do believe that true environmentalists protect nature not because of what it offers us or what the value that we can extract from it. We protect nature because of its intrinsic value, something that we can probably never be able to put into words. And trust me, a lot of nature writers have tried, right, to describe what it is exactly that nature offers us. I start with a quote from Frank Lloyd Wright, which goes, "I believe in God, only I spell it nature." And I think a lot of people can relate to that. It is the deepest form of a landscape that we have that brings us back in touch of what it means to be human and what it means to be connected to the earth. And again, who am I to define what that means for other people? But I
Yeah.
think what's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, but what technologies connect us to the earth? And I know these are going to be controversial for some listeners who are focused only on the environment rather than our relationship with it necessarily. What should
Yeah.
we be thinking about applying and how do you see it connecting? Take AI, for instance.
Yeah, so that's this where that was leading to is this idea that in the current society that we live in, the heavily urbanized scenario that we live in, we can no longer rely on diehard environmentalism to protect nature purely just because it is nature.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, we do need to put a price tag on these places, on these natural spaces. We need to put a price tag on every individual tree that every city has, because it is only when we fully encapsulate the true value and the worth of these natural beings in our cities do I believe we'll have the opportunity to protect them. And technology in that, I think, plays a crucial role. In fact, I don't believe we can do that without the role of technology. So take, for example, a tree inventory. A tree
Mhm.
inventory is at the very, very basis of a sound urban forest management plan. The fact of the matter is there's still a majority of cities around America, around Canada, and many parts of Europe that still do not have a functioning tree inventory, meaning that you're asking people to manage a resource that they don't even have data or metrics on.
Mhm.
But a tree inventory, the way we go around it is still really old fashioned. We're asking people to go around to each individual tree with a measuring tape and a clipboard and a pen and paper to record all these individual metrics about trees. That simply isn't working. Clearly, it's not, because we're still dealing in a situation where departments of park and recreation, urban tree wardens are essentially operating in the dark. And that's where a technology like LiDAR, for example, can come in, which is essentially a 3D mapping technology where you put a scanner on top of a car or on top of a backpack if you aren't able to get to the area by car. And it creates essentially this digital twin of the surroundings, a digital twin of all of the trees in your city, ideally those on public and on private land as well, because just because it's on private land doesn't mean it's not offering immense benefits to the entire community. And you can then use that data. You can use different models that we have at our disposal to exactly put the value of those natural spaces and trees, put a price tag on them, which hopefully mean we'll do a better job at protecting them as well.
Well, in a digital model, a twin is such an interesting thing because you can model something and then see what you can change, how you can change it, and the potential outcomes. Obviously, it depends on the quality of the model, but
Yeah.
where we are today is, as you say, blind to where nature is in relationship to us. Actually, kind of describing the entirety of human history. Maybe we're waking up now, but as you think about the Internet of Nature, which I'd love to hear you describe because it's a really interesting concept. What should we be measuring first in order to make the most fundamental changes in our relationship to nature?
I really believe it does start with trees. When we talk about
Okay.
cities, I really do believe it starts with trees, and second only to our parks and our natural spaces that we
Mhm.
have. The reason why I say trees is because I think it is the most ubiquitous element that we have of the urban ecosystem. It is something that people are more easily able to relate to. You're more able, as odd as that sounds, that you're more able to relate to a tree. I believe that is easier than to relate to a certain kind of other flora or fauna or a park in and of itself. There's this thing about trees, especially older trees, which we need to do a better job of conserving in our. I would much rather see an urban forest policy that was focused on conserving old trees that we already have, rather than solely planting new trees, hundreds, thousands, even millions of them, with very little regard about their maintenance or how we're going to ensure that they last, decades and generations from now. And there's this thing with trees that, some of the oldest trees in cities, they were there before we were born, and hopefully they'll still be there long after we're gone. They're really the only kind of living bridges that we have from the past to the future in our urban environments. And I don't think they're often seen that way. But I think if we did a better job at communicating these stories, explaining like this tree was here when the majority of people on Earth still thought the world was flat, I think that would really help to kind of conceptualize just the dignity and the respect that these, living organisms amongst us deserve, and everything that they do for us.
It's the continuity that you're describing, which I think is so important to understand our
Good way to
relationship
put
to
it.
place.
Yeah,
And growing up in Tacoma, Washington, where I saw all the trees go away over the course of the 60 years or so I've been observing it,
yeah,
I think about the loss of an anchor or orientation point. When I read your description of what happened with the Groen Loper project, I think I said it right, in Maastricht in the Netherlands, I was really struck by the transformation they wrought by moving a freeway underground and
yeah.
focusing on green spaces. Tell us about the project and how you see that as a model for other cities.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the creativity that we're often missing, right?
Mhm.
So, the Groene Loper, or the Green Carpet Project in
If you
Maastricht,
say it
which
right.
is it's a small, it's a I wouldn't imagine it. Dutch is a very tough language, um, especially its pronunciation. Uh, the Green Carpet Project in Maastricht, which is a small student city in the south of the Netherlands, um, it had a very unique ambition, which was anyone that lives around this project, within a certain radius of this project, we actually want to extend their health span. So not just their lifespan, but their health span, the amount of years that you live a healthy and well life, by 5 years. That was their goal. Kind of an insane goal. Like, how do you even go about measuring that? But it immediately changes the incentives and the goals that you end up doing around a project like this. So one of the main issues was that a huge highway that runs through the entirety of the Netherlands cuts straight through the center of Maastricht. And they had there were always plans to make it wider and wider, right? Because wider highways always fix your congestion issues, right? Not. They decided we're going to put it underground, we're going to tunnel it, And on top of it, we're going to create this green carpet, which was this, multiple mile long linear park with nearly 2,000 trees that they planted. But it was a really unique planting project because you can imagine all these trees are planted in what is basically like a metal shoebox, right? They have no chance because they sit on top of a tunnel. They have no chance of ever, extending their roots and hitting the groundwater. So these trees and this greenery needs a lot of management, more than, a tree that ultimately would be able to get his feet wet in the groundwater table would be able to do. So there's this really unique use case for soil sensors in this project, specifically soil moisture sensors, and also some nutrient sensors. But the main thing was moisture, again, because the tree would never be able to hit the groundwater, as many trees in the Netherlands do, because the Netherlands is such a low-lying country. And essentially what they did is they installed only 3. So for something like 1,800 trees, they installed only 3 soil sensors. They created 3 different zones. And basically based on what the sensor said for that zone, they would take that action. Sometimes that would mean watering. Sometimes it would mean watering only a little bit. And sometimes it would mean watering not at all. That was also really important because despite summers that are increasingly hot and increasingly dry, sometimes tree watering crews get a little bit too ambitious and water too much, which actually can lead to tree rot, which can also lead to the demise of the tree. And this research, because we did this experiment between 2 different sites, one with sensors, the other one not, and it really showed that the one with sensors actually only lost 1 tree of these 1,800. So it was like a 99.9% survival rate versus the location that was the same type of tree, same kind of soil conditions in that same summer, actually lost a 1/5 of the trees. So it just shows that information, it's not replacing anyone, it's not replacing anyone's knowledge, but it's simply creating the environment for people that are tasked with taking care of our urban trees, providing them with more information so that they can optimize and make their work a lot more efficient, and ultimately leading to trees that actually grew 3 times faster because they're getting the right amount of water at the right time. And that's what we want, because bigger trees offer us so many more benefits.
I want to particularly dig into the point about people participating in caring for nature, potentially as a role, but in their jobs. But I want to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the conversation with Nadina Galle. She is the author of the recent book, The Nature of Our Cities, which is an exploration into the future of urban ecology. So Nadina, you just were talking about the fact that people can care for nature as part of their job. How do you envision the economy changing so that we do invest in preserving not only nature within green belts and cities, but nature generally? Is this a new job and job category we should be really investing to create?
I love that question, Mitch, and it's not one that I get very often. I have so many different ideas about this. For one, we're seeing massive labor shortages, like many industries are, but we're seeing massive labor shortages when it comes to green professionals. These are people that are taking care of our trees, that are taking care of our urban parks, that are planning for new urban parks. Anything that kind of fits in this green professional category, we're seeing massive shortages there. My hope is that the use of technology here can not only make this field more exciting and more enticing to this new and upcoming generation of potential green professionals, but I also hope is that it makes the work less redundant and tedious and more focused on education and awareness, and which is something that I hear time and time again, that arboriculturalists, urban foresters, urban ecologists actually enjoy the most of their work, is being able to spread their passion and educate the public about the importance of urban ecology and urban forests. But it's something they don't always get the chance to do because they're too busy, as we were seeing with tree inventories, still taking their clipboard around to each individual tree, collecting data that is going to be so rapidly out of date. So I think that's, again, where the role of artificial intelligence can really take over a lot of those administrative and rudimentary tasks, so that the people that we do have, the resources that we do have at our disposal, we're able to use those more optimally and efficiently. Another thing that I hope in terms of changing also the economic value of nature and how we go around that is understanding that currently the liability and often the bill for taking care of natural spaces and urban trees often lands at the municipality's feet. And that's troublesome because that's also the organization that is typically strapped for resources. Any urban forester will tell you it's one of the first divisions to be cut in times of budgetary cuts. And that's been really, really tough because it's not really getting the recognition and the financial resources it deserves. Like we would never accept that kind of ill management or those kinds of budget cuts when it comes to our bridges, our digital infrastructure, our roads, our building safety. Yet arguably one of the most important infrastructural assets, our green infrastructure, time and time again is not prioritized because I think we have a really difficult time proving its value. And that's where I believe measuring it better, having more data at our disposal and analyzing that will hopefully provide us with better means to make arguments and convincing ones at that, why we need the resources. And what I also would love to see is for more stakeholders to take part in footing the bill for green infrastructure. And what I mean by that is if you're a corporate campus or you're a corporate office and your office building looks out over a green park, your employees are going to be more productive, take less sick days, have less burnout symptoms. If you're a hospital looking out over that same greenery, your patients are going to be taking less medications and be out of the hospital quicker, heal faster. If you're a school or a university, your students are going to be more focused, more cognitive develop, score better on tests. We have all these advantages that our green infrastructure and our parks and our trees provide, yet none of those beneficiaries that have a lot more money to spend than our municipalities are footing any part of the bill. That's something I'm not an economist. I don't know how to figure that out, but that is something that I see time and time again is that there are huge beneficiaries of our natural spaces, yet only one party is footing the bill and the liability.
The free rider problem is widespread, and unfortunately, what we're describing is effectively the poor pay for the wealthy's benefits, but don't get those benefits themselves. And it would be remarkable if we could turn that corner. And I think recognizing that the value of nature to our economy is the key, as you just described. One of the things you just mentioned, though, in passing was AI. And the concern about AI is that the amount of energy required to power the kinds of analysis of unstructured data to simplify the tracking of nature in the first place, as well as to build the digital models that were the twins you were talking about before, is immense. Are you hopeful that we can build a renewable energy infrastructure that can power a system that would allow us to really return to a true relationship with nature?
I am, but I'm also realistic to know that solar and wind alone are not going to get us there. I'm very hopeful of the future of nuclear energy, which I know is a controversial subject, but that I believe is the only true way out of the oil and gas industry and economy that we've built for ourselves. And we also need to be conscious, right, of how we're using artificial intelligence and using it responsibly and ethically so that we can ensure that when we're using it, we are actually going to use it, right? That we're not making unnecessary computations and calculations for things that we're not ultimately going to be using. So I think we need to be really concise and considerate also in the prompts in the bigger sense of the word, so that when we are using it and using that as a tool, we're actually going to act on that data. Because I think there is this general idea that data quantity is better than data quality.
Yeah.
And more sensors and more data, that's always going to help us out. And there will be patterns just in the sheer widespread amount of numbers. In the sense of using sensors, for example, like in this example that I sketch, nearly 2,000 trees, only 3 sensors. That feels like a really ethical and responsible use of technology and the data analytics behind it as well. And I think we need to, in the same way that we want to be really critical of choosing and planting the right tree at the right time in the right place, we need to have the same kind of consideration going to our use of AI.
The efficiencies we can accomplish are phenomenal. It's a matter of thinking through it. And one of the things that I find challenging when I talk about this is that we often talk about silver bullet solutions. If we do this one thing, everything will be fine. And that's not the way nature works in the first place. We need to recognize that. So are smart cities the answer, or do we need, which we are told, oh, just put the sensors in place, everything will be fine. How do we balance that investment with all the other thinking we need to do about the relationship and how we manage those resources within the city and across the city's relationship with the rest of the global economy?
Yeah, I think you need to be really realistic that using AI, using sensors for the improvement of an urban ecosystem, it's about supplementing intelligence, not replacing it. And I think we run a real danger here, and I'm very wary of that. And I write about that also in the book, that we need to be careful that we're not starting to blindly trust technology,
Yeah.
right? In the same way that if you're following Google Maps and Google Maps tells you to turn left, and you can very clearly see with both eyes that turning left is a very, very bad idea, don't turn left, even if Google Maps tells you to turn left. We need to have that same kind of sobering mindset when it comes to the use of technology in this space as well. Like, if you're a tree watering crew and the sensor tells you to water a tree, but you're digging your hands in the soil and very clearly, the soil has enough water and it's very well saturated and you really shouldn't be watering the tree, don't water the tree. And we need to make sure that we also are mentoring the next generation of green professionals to be able to, frankly, use their brains and use the technology as an aid and not as a replacement for their own knowledge and intelligence. And that, I feel like we can only get there by having really good mentorship programs and making sure that the decades of experience of the generation that is now close to retirement is being passed on to the next generation. So yes, we're coming into a generation of Gen Z and millennials, digital natives, if you will. I think these technologies are going to help entice them into this field, but we also need to make sure that we're not losing the deeply grounded ecological knowledge that is necessary to properly take care of an ecosystem.
Thanks. That was really well stated. I think we haven't come to terms with the fact that our history is not just the problem, it's part of the solution. And it's hard for a lot of people, particularly younger people who see the mess we've made, wanting to clean it up, to recognize that we did learn a lot along the way. And one of the catalysts for a lot of change recently was the COVID-19 pandemic. And you talk about how it changed cities a bit. Can you describe what you think happened to us as a society because of the pandemic?
I think it became quite clear early on in the pandemic that, the spread of COVID was very minimal outside. And I'm very glad that that information came out. Well, I have a lot of thoughts about how the pandemic went, but I will say I'm very glad that that information came out when it did, because I think what it helped a lot of people do is, in times of extreme isolation, it helped to send people outside. And I wish there had been even more communication about the benefits of getting outside. I wish there had been more communication about the benefits of getting vitamin D, of fresh air, of
Yeah.
exercise, of taking care of yourself and doing a lot of that outside, being able to have social interactions outside, whether that be with your friends or your family or neighbors, whether younger or elderly. I feel like nature, at least for me personally and a lot of people in my life, being outside kind of became the backdrop for everything, birthday parties, graduation celebrations, Friday night drinks, taking babies out, to the playground, things like that you would maybe normally have done inside. All of this kind of nature and the outdoors became the backdrop for those kinds of activities. And I hope that we've held on to that in a little bit. One of the ways that I'm seeing it, for example, it became, because nobody was going into the office. If you lived in the same city as your colleagues, it became normal to meet up and go on a weeting, a walking meeting, which I love. And that's a concept that I still see to be quite popular. So I hope that there's a little bit of these things that we maintain, because I think it was incredibly impactful. And also, of course, what it did is it raised awareness about the fact that good quality urban parks are not equally spread around cities. And I think it hopefully opened up pathways to people being able to convince, whether that be their neighborhood commission, their homeowners association, or their municipality at large, that there need to be investments made to both improve existing parks and create new natural spaces in neighborhoods that might have them, because it is, I would argue, the most important public health intervention that we have in the pandemic and otherwise.
So, what is your advice for a local government or an urban planner thinking about how to address this? What should they focus on today, and how should they engage the citizens that they're serving in that process?
I think first and foremost, you have to take stock. So I talk about a technology called Nature Score, developed by an Oregon company called Nature Quant, based out of Eugene. And what Nature Score is essentially it goes beyond just mapping greenery, which is what previous assessments have done. It maps all natural elements, and specifically the natural elements that have proven to have health benefiting properties. So trees, open parks, green space, even water bodies.
Mhm.
Water bodies, for example, can be incredibly healing to the human mind and the human body, but are often disregarded from greenery assessments because, well, it's not green. So it was left behind. And what Nature Score has done is in a similar way that you have Walk Score, which I believe is quite popular in the US. Sometimes you have it like on real estate listings.
Yep.
I would love to see something like Nature Score take off in that sense as well. Have it be taken into account, for example, when you're in your doctor's office. Oh, what's your nature score? To have an idea of like what kind of environment that person is growing up in or that lives in that. I would love to see it taken into account by principals of schools, by police chiefs. There's so many links that we can make between the amount of health supporting nature around us and things like crime and how our students do and the general health and well-being of a population. So I would love to see something like that take off. And I think what the first thing that a municipality can do is understand, take stock, what do we have and where are the most highest priority areas that we need to intervene in and have greening interventions first. And we see a map like Nature Score already being used by an organization like the Arbor Day Foundation, one of the largest, tree planting organizations in the States and in the world. And they are using Nature Score. They've always had the goal, we want to plant trees in the most disadvantaged communities because they are going to benefit most. And I wholly stand by this, right? You're much better off planting one tree on a street that doesn't have any than you are planting an additional tree on a street that already has 10, right? I think we can all kind of imagine why that might be the case. And Arbor Day Foundation is using Nature Score to be able to target those areas and then intervene there. But of course, working with local community partners and people on the ground to make sure that those trees are wanted and going to be cared for. Because the last thing you want to do is come in literally from the sky and start greening without any buy-in from the community.
About 75% of the urban environment that is going to exist in 2050 or 2060 has not been built. We have an opportunity to reinvent urbanism over the course of the next 25 or 30 years. How do you imagine the relationship between nature and cities evolving in that time? And what are the key features that we should be looking for and doubling down on when we see them beginning to emerge?
It's such an important question because there is massive opportunity here. And the fact of the matter is, it is way easier to incorporate greenery and nature in a new build than it is to retrofit. Tons of opportunities for retrofitting as well. But as we see, especially in a very historical city like Amsterdam, where I am, it is very, very difficult to get done in the very historical canal belts of Amsterdam because retrofitting is so difficult to do on heritage buildings. That being said, in the new build, there's so many exciting initiatives and guidelines that I'm seeing take off. Things like you have to green or leave green at least the footprint that you're building and your parking spots are going to take up. So that means that, if you're a developer and you have a piece of land, at least 50% of that piece of land has to stay green or has to be greened. Another way to do this is to also not look at just what you can do on the ground level, but moving up vertically as well. What can we do in our green walls, our facades, our green roofs, not only for the people living in that building, but those that are looking at that building as well? It seems so simple and so trite, but if you're looking across the street or looking across at the next row of buildings, and those buildings are covered in greenery, are covered in ivy, that already is going to put your mind at ease versus if you're just looking at a grayscape. It seems impossible to imagine that it can be that simple, but it really is. And for people that are still arguing, no, we can't do that, it's so expensive, that is such bullshit because the cost of not doing it is so much more. And we're seeing this in an environment where we have increasing frequency and veracity, whether that be heat waves, flooding, extreme precipitation, wildfires, the emerging biodiversity crisis, and the fact that we are living in a public health crisis. People are lonelier than ever, are dealing with mental health disorders, have lost hope for future generations. There are people that no longer want to have children because they fear of the world that they're bringing in. That almost makes me emotional. Like, I get so heartbreaking, especially as a new mother myself. That is so heartbreaking to me that people do not want to bring children into this world, because that is ultimately what I believe we were put on this earth to do. And I just think that is so heartbreaking. And I want to do everything I can to create environments for people, young and old, to live in where they feel that hope and optimism on a daily basis.
Well, Nadina, I think that the nature of our cities takes a big step in that direction, and I hope everybody will take the time to read it. Thank you so much for the time today. It's been fascinating.
Thanks, Mitch. This was lovely.
That was my conversation with Nadina Galle. She is the author of The Nature of Our Cities, which is available now on Amazon.com or at Powell's Books, which you can find at powells.com, as well as your local bookstore. You can learn more about Nadina at her website, nadinagalle.com. Nadina Galle is all one word, no space, no dash, and Galle is spelled with a G. From fire and the wheel to the reinforced concrete frames that define modern buildings, we're surrounded by technology, and we tend to forget that technology emerged in response to nature. Of course, too often we treated nature as the enemy, the chaos that we had to contain, instead of recognizing that nature's cycles and changes are the harmony that we need to join in order to sustain society. The loss of any semblance of natural patterns, which ultimately leads to the depletion of resources necessary for life, has inevitably led to the collapse of previous major civilizations. And in the modern era, we've attempted to tame nature globally, which has given us more runway than those previous extractive societies. But the bill is clearly coming due in extreme weather, drought, wildfire, sea level rise, and so many other clearly evident negative impacts. So it's time to reweave our relationship with nature, integrating it into our world, giving it primacy and sustenance to recover our human future. Nadina's The Nature of Our Cities is a powerful, straightforward, and emotionally resonant book to help you think about your role and the choices that you can make to restore nature. So I hope you'll check it out. And would you please take a moment to share this podcast or any of the more than 490 interviews we've produced on sustainability in your ear? Writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. Folks, you're the amplifiers that can spread more ideas so we create less waste. Tell your friends, family, and your coworkers that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or whatever purveyor of podcast goodness that they prefer. Thanks for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, and we'll be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.